Her hand moved first. Imani Bakari reached across the mirrored table and laid her palm into Yoon Jae-Sung's open hand, and the whole room let out a breath at the same time. The elders on both sides lowered their heads. Someone slid the marriage contract into the center of the glass, where it lay reflected twice. It was done. The truce was law now, sealed in front of every witness who mattered, and no one in that chamber could pretend they had not just watched it happen. At the head of the table, Kang Min-Ho did not move. He had come to this chamber to win an alliance, the same way he had won every alliance, every stretch of territory, every quiet war for 15 years. He had never once left a room with less than he walked in for. He watched her hand disappear inside his rival's, and he understood, with a cold, clean precision that felt almost like nausea, that he had just lost for the first time in his life. Here is the thing the room misjudged, the thing Kang Min-Ho caught in the first 3 seconds and could not stop turning over. She had not been carried to this table as a prize. She had run it. Imani commanded a network of her own people, thousands of them, the ones both syndicates would have ground into dust if their war reignited. Every elder in that chamber owed her something. She had chosen this marriage the way a general chooses ground. And she had chosen his rival. Not because Yoon Jae-Sung was the better man. Anyone with working eyes could see he was not. She had chosen the rival because the other option, the man at the head of the table with the still hands and the winter in his eyes, was the more dangerous want, and Imani did not build an empire by handing her enemies the one thing that could take it apart. She looked at Kang Min-Ho once, long and level, then looked away. Yoon Jae-Sung slid the wedding band onto her finger, and the small gold circle closed around everything. The war would sleep now. 2 syndicates that had bled each other for a decade would stand down because of this woman and this ring. Down the table, Kang Min-Ho watched the metal settle against her skin, and something in his chest pulled so hard it frightened him. He had wanted many things in his life. He had never wanted one he could not simply take. He did not move, and neither did anyone else in that room, because everyone knew what it meant when this man went quiet. If you feel that stillness too, that is exactly why this channel exists, to bring you stories that hold you like this from the first breath to the last. Subscribing tells us the work is landing, that these stories are reaching the people they were made for, and it is the one thing that lets us keep building them for you. So if this already has you, make it official. Then stay close, because what he does next is the reason no one ever crossed him twice. Yoon Jae-Sung looked up from the contract and found Kang Min-Ho at the far end, and he smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had spent years trying to break his enemy and had finally found the one weapon that would do it, a weapon his enemy could see but never touch. He had married the alliance out from under him, and he had married the one woman Kang Min-Ho would have burned the city to keep. Imani rose before any man could offer her a hand. She had learned long ago that the moment you let someone help you stand, they start to believe you needed helping. The elders got to their feet with her. Out of respect, that was hers, and not her new husband's, and she felt Kang Min-Ho's eyes on her the whole way up, steady and heavy as a hand between her shoulder blades. She did not give him the satisfaction of looking back. The chamber doors opened onto the reception gallery, and the noise of it rolled over her, 100 guests turning to see the bride who had bought peace with her own hand. Imani moved through them like still water, accepting congratulations she did not believe, smiling at men who would have let her people starve. Every one of them thought they were looking at a woman who had been placed. Not one of them understood they were looking at the person who had moved all the pieces. Kang Min-Ho came through the doors a few steps behind her, and the crowd made room without being asked. He was not following her, he told himself. He was leaving. The exit happened to lie in her direction. He had built a whole life on lies he told other people, and had somehow never needed to lie to himself before tonight. His feet carried him toward the woman in emerald, and the colder part of his mind noted, with something close to alarm, that he let them. She felt him before she saw him. That was the part she hated most. The way her own body announced him like an alarm she had never installed. Imani turned, and there he was across the churn of guests, not smiling, not performing, just looking at her the way no one had looked at her in years, like an equal, like a threat, like the one person in the building who saw exactly what she was. For one breath she let herself look back. Then Yoon Jae-Sung's hand found the small of her back, warm and heavy and claiming, and steered her a quarter turn until the sight line broke. He murmured something about greeting the northern families, his mouth close to her ear, his eyes on Kang Min-Ho the entire time. He knew. Of course he knew. He had chosen her partly because he had seen the way his enemy watched her, and there is no possession sweeter to a small man than the one that wounds a greater one. Imani let him steer her, because a scene tonight helped no one, but under the emerald sleeve her hand had closed into a fist. She had spent her whole life being underestimated by men who mistook her calm for softness, and every single one of them had learned. Yoon Jae-Sung would learn too. She just needed him to keep believing he had won for one more night. While she finished reading the room she thought she already understood. She did not know yet how wrong she was. Kang Min-Ho made himself turn away. It cost him more than any negotiation ever had. He walked toward the dark mouth of a side passage where the music thinned, telling himself he would leave, get in the car, drive back to a life that made sense. One where he took what he wanted and never stood in a bright room aching over a married woman like a boy. He got 4 steps before he heard the emerald fabric move behind him. She should not have followed him. She knew it the way you know a stove is hot before you touch it, all warning and no obedience. But Imani had one question she needed answered tonight, and only one person in that building could answer it, and if she did not ask it now, married and cornered and running out of nights, she never would. She lifted her hem, checked that her husband was busy performing warmth for the northern families, and slipped into the dark after Kang Min-Ho. He heard her and turned, and then they were alone in the narrow dark with the party reduced to a golden hum behind them. For a moment, neither of them said anything. There was too much to say and no safe way to begin any of it. She had crossed a line just by standing here, a married woman in a shadow with the man her husband hated most, and they both knew exactly what it would cost her if the wrong person walked past. He caught her wrist before she could speak and drew her sideways into a small antechamber where the music died to almost nothing. He did not grip hard. That was the thing that undid her, how carefully he held her, like a man handling something he already knew he was not allowed to keep. He let go the second she was inside. Kang Min-Ho did not take from people who had not agreed to be taken from. Even now, even her. She crossed her arms and asked the only question that mattered to her tonight. Why had he come? Not to the marriage, they both understood he had come for the alliance. But why had he stayed after it was lost? Why was he standing in a dark room with another man's wife instead of already gone? She wanted him to lie. A lie she could dismiss. A lie would let her walk back out to her husband and forget the way her pulse was behaving. He did not lie. That was the cruelty of him. He told her, in 5 plain words, that he had stayed because leaving had stopped being possible the moment her hand touched his rival's, and he said it the way another man might confess a terminal diagnosis. No heat, no seduction, just fact. Imani had spent her life around men who weaponized their wanting. She had no defense at all against a man who simply set his down on the table like a body. They stood there measuring each other in the dark, and for the first time all night neither of them was performing. Not the bride, not the boss, just 2 people who had clawed their way to the top of impossible worlds and recognized with a kind of grief that the only equal either had ever met was standing on the wrong side of a wedding ring. He knew what her calm cost. She knew what his stillness hid. She had spent so many years being the strongest person in every room that she had forgotten what it felt like to be met. And now that it was happening, in a dark she could not keep, it frightened her more than any threat her husband could make. It was the loneliest thing, being seen. So she said the wall out loud, because naming it was the only way to make it hold. The marriage was public and sealed and witnessed by every elder on both sides. Breaking it did not mean scandal. It meant the war came back, and the war meant her people. Thousands of them, the network she had bled to protect, ground into the dirt between 2 syndicates. She had not sold herself. She had spent herself, and a debt like that did not come with a refund. Then she touched the gold cuff at her wrist and told him the second wall, the one no one outside her people could feel the weight of. Her elders had given her this bracelet the day they gave her authority, and their word was law over her the way gravity was law. To defy them was not rebellion, it was to unmake her own family, to sever herself from the very people she had married a stranger to protect. She could break either wall, not both. Kang Min-Ho looked at that small band of gold and understood the trap in a way that made his hands go cold. He was a man who had never met a wall he could not buy, break, or outlast. He could put a bullet in Yoon Jae-Sung by morning. He could not put a bullet in her elders without murdering the only thing she had left. For the first time in 15 years he stood in front of a problem that force made worse. His hand came up toward her cheek and stopped. Just stopped, a breath away, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his palm without a single point of contact, and he held it there, letting her be the one to decide. That was the most dangerous thing he had done all night, because a man who grabbed she could have fought. A man who waited, who left the last inch to her, gave her nothing to push against except her own want. She stepped back. It was the hardest step she had ever taken, and it looked like nothing. One small movement of a woman in green, and it saved both their lives for another few hours. Imani had learned that love was not the thing you felt. It was the thing you chose to set down for the people who depended on you. She had thousands depending on her. So she took her want and she folded it small and she stepped back into the dark. Yoon Jae-Sung filled the doorway. Neither of them had heard him come. He looked at the space between his wife and his enemy, measured it to the inch, and smiled. And that smile told Imani everything about the kind of night the people under her command were about to have. Her husband did not punish her when she crossed him. He was too clever for that. He punished the ones she could not protect and made her watch, so the leash stayed tight. He did not raise his voice. He walked back into the reception, found one of his men near the bar, put a hand on his shoulder like a warm host, and said 6 words into his ear. By the terms of the truce, 3 of Imani's people were staying in a guarded annex tonight as a gesture of good faith. By the terms of Yoon Jae-Sung's cruelty, one of them would not see morning, and Imani would know exactly why. Imani had come back into the light just in time to see it, the hand on the shoulder, the 6 quiet words, and her whole body understood before her mind caught up. She pressed a hand flat to her stomach to keep herself upright. This was the arithmetic of her marriage. Every inch she reached toward what she wanted was measured out in someone else's blood. Restraint was not the safe choice here. Restraint was the only thing keeping her people breathing. From the shadow of the passage, Kang Min-Ho watched the same exchange and read it faster because he had built machines like it himself. He understood now why she stepped back. It was not fear for herself. She would have walked into fire for herself. It was the leash, the elegant, monstrous leash her husband had wrapped around the throats of everyone she loved. And watching her stand there absorbing it, silent, upright, taking the wound so her people would not, he stopped merely wanting her. He started planning. She found a corner and gripped a glass she would never drink, her eyes locked on the double doors where they had taken her people, waiting to learn which name the night would cost her. Whoever is still here with me, still leaning in, do one small thing before that door opens. Drop the emoji that matches the mood in your chest right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is where you are. If you are watching on your TV, tap that like so I know you are in the room with us. Then hold still. Because the person on the other side of that door is about to change everything Imani thought she was safe from. The doors opened. The guard came out alone, and he did not look at anyone, which was how she knew. One of hers was gone. A man named for his grandmother, who had a daughter learning to walk, who had trusted Imani's promise that this marriage would keep them all safe. She kept her face perfectly still because 100 people were watching the bride, and behind that stillness, something in her began, very quietly, to come apart. She held the mask. She had built that mask over 20 years, and it did not fail her now. Not one tear fell, not one guest saw anything but a serene bride. But inside, the defiance that had carried her into this room all night, the certainty that she was the one running the board, was starting to curdle into a colder feeling she could not yet name. She had walked in believing she controlled this. She was no longer sure that was true. Grief was useless to her, so she turned it into motion. The moment the crowd's attention drifted, Imani slipped out of the gallery and into the cold service corridors, moving fast, because a woman who ran a network the size of hers did not mourn by weeping. She mourned by finding out who to make pay. Someone had known her people were vulnerable in that annex tonight. Someone had set the timing. And the more she thought about it, the less it looked like her husband acting alone. She found the door where they had kept her people, and it was locked. She pressed her palm flat against the wood and listened, and heard nothing, which told her they had already been moved. But it was not the emptiness that stopped her breath. It was the small brass key plate, and the fact that she recognized the lock. It was an elder's lock, the kind only her own people used, the kind her husband's men had no reason to own. A thought arrived that she did not want and could not send back. She had built her entire strategy on one belief, that her elders were the ones she was protecting, the innocents behind her, the reason for every sacrifice. But an elder's lock on that door meant her own people had been part of moving hers. And if that was true, then the ground she had been standing on all her life was not ground at all. It was a trap door, and someone had a hand on the latch. Kang Min-Ho found her there. He had been tracking the same thread from the other end, following the guard who came out alone, and it had led him to the same cold corridor and the same locked door. They looked at each other across the dim, and neither needed to explain. They had both arrived at the edge of the same terrible shape, from opposite directions, and the fact that they arrived together told them it was real. Two people who missed nothing had both seen it. For the next few minutes they were not a wanting man and a forbidden woman. They were two of the sharpest operators alive with a shared enemy and no time. She held up her phone and showed him what she had pulled from her network in the corridor. Movements, timings, a payment routed through an account she half recognized. He read it over her shoulder, fast, and his stillness changed quality, sharpened into something with an edge. The picture forming was worse than either had guessed. The transfer had gone out 3 weeks before the marriage was ever proposed. 3 weeks. She read the date again, and then a third time, the way you press on a bruise to check it is real, hoping the numbers would rearrange themselves into something she could live with. They did not. That was the detail that turned her stomach to ice. The deal her elders had presented to her as a desperate last resort, a shield struck in a crisis, had been paid for before the crisis was even public, which meant the crisis had not happened to her people. It had been done to them, on purpose. And she had married a stranger to solve a wound that someone she trusted had cut into her own family with their own hands. He looked up from the screen and told her the shape of it, plainly, the way he had told her the truth in the antechamber, because she had earned honesty, even when honesty was a blade. Someone manufactured the ruin, someone engineered the exact disaster that forced her people to need a marriage, then offered the marriage as the cure. That was not the work of an enemy outside the walls. An enemy outside could not have reached her elders' locks. This came from inside her own house. She stepped back and raised a hand, and for the first time all night, the great composure of Imani Bakari failed in front of another person. Not her elders. It could not be her elders. Those were the people she had carried on her back her whole life, the ones whose approval she had bled for, the family that made her who she was. She would rather it be him. She would rather the man she wanted turn out to be the monster than the people she loved. He did not push. A lesser man would have pressed the advantage, used her braking to pull her closer, but Kang Min-Ho lowered his hands and simply let her stand in the wreckage of it. He knew what it was to have your own house be the thing that hunts you. He had learned that lesson young, and it had made him what he was. He would not rush her through it. He would only make sure that when she turned to face it, she was not alone in the dark. Then she pulled herself back together, and it was a terrible thing to watch, a woman rebuilding her own spine in real time. If it was true, she needed to hear it from the one place it could not be denied. She would go to the table where this all began, the mirrored chamber, and she would put it to the person who could confirm it or kill the thought. She looked at Kang Min-Ho and said she was going back to the chamber. He said he was coming with her. The chamber was empty now, the elders gone, the contract carried off to be filed, and the long mirrored table sat cold and gleaming under the low amber light. It looked exactly as it had hours ago when she laid her hand into her husband's and thought she was winning. She walked to the same seat. Kang Min-Ho stood where he had stood before, at the head, the man who had watched her seal his defeat. The whole night had circled back to this one table, and there, across the same glass where the marriage was made, the confession finally came, though not the one either of them had been circling all night. He did not tell her he loved her. She did not tell him she was his. What he said was harder and truer than that. He told her that whatever she decided to do about her elders, whatever it cost, whichever wall she chose to bring down, he would stand on her side of it, not to win her, just because it was her. It cost him everything to say it, and it showed. This was a man who had spent 15 years making sure no one ever knew where he was soft, because soft was where they cut you. And here he was, at the head of the table where he had lost his first war, handing the woman who dealt that loss the exact map of his one weakness, trusting her not to use it. It was the most reckless thing Kang Min-Ho had ever done. It was also the only true thing. Something in Imani gave way. She rose halfway from the chair and leaned across the table, her palm flat on the cold mirrored glass, reaching toward him over the very surface where she had signed herself away, and for one suspended second the wall between them thinned to nothing. She was going to tell him that she had chosen the rival because he was safe to lose and Kang Min-Ho was not, that in another life with no thousands on her back, she would have chosen him in a heartbeat. The doors opened, Imani sank back into her chair so fast it looked like she had never moved, but Yoon Jae-Sung had already seen the shape of it, his wife half across a table reaching for his enemy. He did not shout, he smiled, that same patient smile, and said it was time. The elders were waiting. The final vows, the public ones, the sacred ones that would make the truce permanent in front of every witness, were about to begin. And he wanted his bride at his side. He walked her to the ceremony hall himself, his hand closed warm around her elbow, and to anyone watching it looked like a husband proud to present his wife. Only she could feel the pressure of his fingers, the reminder underneath the tenderness. She let him steer her. Her mind was not in the corridor at all. It was 3 weeks before the marriage, following the money, arriving over and over at the same locked door with the same elder's lock, and she could not make the answer be anything else. The hall was full. Every seat held someone who mattered, elders from both sides, the heads of families that had spent a decade at war, all of them gathered to witness the vows that would bind the peace in something older and stronger than a signed contract. The lanterns burned low and gold. At the far end, on the raised dais, the altar waited. This was the moment the whole night had been built to reach, the sacred seal, the point of no return. Kang Min-Ho took a place at the very back, against the wall, in the shadow where he had spent most of his life. He had no reason to stay for this. Watching her marry his rival once had already cost him his undefeated name. Watching her seal it forever should have been unbearable. But he had told her he would stand on her side of whatever wall came down, and a man who had never broken his word was not going to start tonight, even if keeping it meant standing in the dark and bleeding quietly. They took their places on the dais. The officiating elder, a man Imani had loved since childhood, a man whose hands had blessed her at every turning point of her life, lifted his voice and began the sacred words. Yoon Jae-Sung took both her hands. She let him. She looked into her elder's kind old face, the face of the family she would have died for, and she made herself smile, and the dread sat in her chest like a stone she had swallowed whole. Every word he spoke was one she had heard him say over other couples since she was a little girl, words she had once thought were the most beautiful thing her people owned, and now each one landed on her like a stone laid over a grave, sealing her in with a smile she could not drop. Halfway through the vows, at her hip, the small emerald clutch began to buzz. Once, twice. A pattern she knew, the urgent one, the one her network only used when something could not wait. Her hand drifted to the clasp on instinct before her mind could stop it. She should have ignored it. A bride does not check her phone mid-vow. But the pattern kept coming, insistent, and every cell in her body had already gone cold with the certainty that she needed to see it now. She tilted the phone up just enough to steal a glance, and the world stopped. It was from inside her own network, from someone loyal, someone terrified, and it laid the whole thing bare in a handful of words. The ruin had been manufactured by her elders. The marriage had been the cover, and tonight, under that cover, with the hall full and the vows binding everyone's attention, her elders had struck a private price with Yoon Jae-Sung, a kill order, Kang Min-Ho, executed before the night was out. Every certainty she had walked in with came apart at once. She had believed she was the one running the board, the general who chose her ground, the woman 3 moves ahead of every man in the room. She had been the pawn from the very first second. Her elders had manufactured the disaster, sold her into the marriage, and used her wedding as the curtain behind which they would murder the one man who had offered to stand beside her. The calm woman who ran every room had been played by the people she trusted most. She lifted her eyes to the elder she had loved her whole life, still speaking the sacred words over her in that gentle voice, blessing a marriage he had built as a slaughterhouse. He smiled at her the way he had smiled when she was a girl. And that was the cruelest part, that his face had not changed at all, that a man could carry a betrayal this size behind eyes that looked at her with such warmth. The family that made her had been lying to her the entire time. Her eyes found him across the whole length of the hall, past 70 oblivious guests, and locked onto the tall figure against the back wall. He read her face instantly, because he always read her, and he went very still, understanding that something had just gone catastrophically wrong without knowing yet that the something was his own death, already ordered, already moving toward him somewhere in this building. He took half a step toward her. She held him in place with her eyes alone. The math arrived in the space of one breath, and it was the worst equation of her life. The only way to stop the kill order was to blow it all open. Right here, right now, to shatter the vows in front of every witness and expose her elders as murderers. But the vows were the truce, and the truce was the only thing keeping her thousands alive. To save the man she wanted, she had to detonate the piece that protected her people. Save him or save them, not both. The elder finished the sacred words and the hall went silent, waiting for her answer, the single word that would seal the truce forever. Yoon Jae-Sung's fingers tightened around hers, expectant, certain. Somewhere in this building his men were already moving toward Kang Min-Ho. She had perhaps 60 seconds before it was done and could never be undone. Every eye in the room was on her mouth. The words sat on her tongue, and behind it sat the lives of everyone she had ever loved, on both sides of an impossible line. One tear broke and ran, and she did not wipe it away. Her whole life had been a series of impossible sums where she paid, and the people above her collected. Not this time. Whatever she chose in the next few seconds, the version of Imani Bakari who believed she was safe, who believed her family loved her, who believed she was the one in control, that woman was already gone, burned away in the lantern light. She drew the breath to speak. She lifted her chin and she opened her mouth, and beside her Yoon Jae-Sung's certainty flickered for the first time all night, a hairline crack of doubt crossing his broad face as he registered something in his bride he had never once seen there. The hall held its breath with her. The word that was about to leave her mouth would either save the man at the back wall or save the thousands at her back, and there was no version of the next second in which she did not lose something she could not live without. And there, with the word half-formed on her lips and the lives of everyone she loved balanced on the edge of it, with the man she wanted marked for death at the back of the hall and the family that made her waiting to collect their peace, Imani Bakari made her choice. If your gut says he already knew, comment the one word for what you think she does next, and tell me if you need part 2.